Okay, let's move right on. Say hello to YouTube again, chat, because this is the second part of the tier list videos. The tier list Thursday action continues. No one tell them, no narcs. Tier list Thursday or tier list Tuesday, whatever you want. It is a tier list day where we're at. We're gonna do board breakers and tech cards. And as you've noticed, if you've seen the hand trap discussion video that I already put up, I was not too fond of that many hand traps. Like, many of the hand traps are in weird spots. That's partially due to the reason that Kashtira and Flunder work very differently than Tearlament, so it's really hard to have hand traps that are good against both. And then triple tactics tasking is a thing and whatnot, so monster hand traps are in a tough spot after Photon Hypernova, in my opinion. And this is why we're going to talk about a bunch of these board breakers slash power spells slash whatever you want to call it. Tech cards, non-engine. They have many names. We're going to talk about the most relevant ones. As always, of course, I have not included every single spell card that can help you break a board. So if you miss any of the board breakers in this video and you want to know my opinion on it, leave a comment down below as always, and I'll let you know what I think about it. Same tiers as with the hand traps, self-explanatory, I hope. And we're gonna get right in. Dark Ruler No More is a powerful card that is not seeing a lot of play in the TCG right now before Photon Hypernova, simply because it is not the best choice against Tearlament, simply because the Tearlament deck has a lot of different layers of interruption. It's not just about the monsters on the board, it also has like trap cards, it has the Grave Shufflers, it has hand traps. It's not a very strong main deck option. It's okay against Flunder. However, one of the problems of Dark Ruler against Flunder is that, like, if you Dark Ruler, you can never win on that turn, and the Flunder deck is notorious for having a very strong comeback turn with all the resource recycling. So Dark Ruler is okay against Flunder, but only if you can really like stabilize after. And you also have to play around like the Flunder field spell and the Flunder trap card as well. I think this card is an okay card overall. It is worth noting with triple tactics tasking, which is a card that we're going to talk about in a second, there is some merit to playing a one-off Dark Ruler No More, but as its own standalone card, I think this card is only okay. It is, however, in my opinion, a lot better than Forbidden Droplet. It feels very weird, but it needs to be said. Forbidden Droplet goes here in this upcoming format. Droplet is not a good card right now. This is mainly because basically the same reasons as Dark Ruler. Negating stuff on the field isn't that great. Now, Droplet has some advantages over Dark Ruler and then some downsides compared to Dark Ruler. The biggest problem, though, is Kashtira Arisard, which is a card I'm going to refer to here, which is the boss monster of the Kashtira archetype, says that every card that's sent to the graveyard is banished instead, which that would be the prime target to negate for a lot of decks for Droplet. But let me tell you, you can't do that because Droplet needs to send the cards from your hand or field to the graveyard as cost. You cannot negate Kashtira Arisard with Droplet. Combine all those things, not that good against Kashtira, not that good against Tier, okay against Flunder, but can't use it under Shifter. Once again, like, the card is not great right now. The card is not very good. Oh, another thing that I wanted to also talk about with effect negation in general, another card that a lot of decks are going to be worried about in this upcoming format is the other Kashtira XYZ. They usually end on both of these, and Kashtira Shangri-Ira has this effect where it locks a bunch of your zones and you can't use them as long as it's on the field. Now, one specialty about these cards is if you negate the effect of Shangri-Ira, these zones can still not be used because it is still on the field. That's a lingering effect. So negating Shangri-Ira with one of those cards does not remove the locking from your zones. That's specifically why Dark Ruler is not that good against Kashtira. If it wasn't for that, Dark Ruler would probably be solid against Kashtira, but if you still have to deal with that, is a little bit annoying. That being said, I think Chalice, unironically, is better than Droplet, simply because it can negate Kashtira Arisard. I don't know if you want to play Chalice. Like, it's better than Droplet, but it's not really like impactful because it's just a one-to-one negate. But you can experiment with it. I'm not gonna stop you from using Chalice. It's not the worst card in the world. It's like, okay, going first, a little bit of an interrupt. It's worse than Imperm by a lot, but if you're already playing Imperm, maybe you want to add Chalice on top. I don't hate it. Does the attack gain matter? Most likely not, but yeah, as a super budget option, it's all right. Raigeki and Dark-Hole, I'm gonna treat them as pretty much the same thing. It is worth noting, of course, Raigeki is technically the better card in a vacuum. Only destroying your opponent's stuff is better than destroying everything, but we've already talked about it in the hand trap discussion, where we talked about it when we mentioned Nibiru, is that some Kashtira players will play cards like Ibli to lock the opponent and to not get Nibiru'd. In a scenario like that, Dark Hole would be better than Raigeki. So technically, both of those cards are all right. They're good against Kashtira. They're definitely solid. They're solid against Flunder too. The one problem that you have to be aware of is that Kashtira Shangri-Ira has this effect where it can protect itself by detaching a material. It can protect itself from destruction, which is why we're going to talk about some other ways of getting rid of the cards that doesn't destroy them. But if you don't have a problem with Kashtira Shangri-Ira locking your zones, then Dark Hole and Raigeki are solid options for sure against the Kashtira deck. Against Tyr, of course, these cards suck. Against Flunder, these cards are good. It's worth noting that, of course, these cards don't win you the game immediately against Flunder because they still usually have the field spell that you have to pay attention to, and they have the Dreaming Town to summon after you Dark Hole the board, but these cards are solid. Lightning Storm, however, I'm hesitant to call Lightning Storm mediocre or bad because it is Lightning Storm. Like, it is Lightning Storm. The card is good. I just don't really see a matchup where I would want to side this card in this current environment because it's not that good against Tyr, but it's also not bad. It's not that good against Flunder, but it's also not bad. But the only deck it sucks against is Kashtira because they summon a bunch of their monsters in defense position and they usually don't have back row, and it doesn't help against Ibli, so it's not very good. It's good against Labyrinth, but look, we're not going to be preparing our side deck for Labyrinth. Labyrinth needs to be handled by the cards you already want to put in your deck, but Lightning Storm does not go into your deck because of Labyrinth. I'm not going to put it in the mediocre or bad. Maybe you have your reasons to experiment with Lightning Storm because, like, maybe your deck really needs to get rid of Saliak. You don't care about any of the other disruption that Tyr puts up. You really just want to get rid of Saliak. Then maybe this is the thing you want. It's not a terrible card in those matchups, but I overall think that Lightning Storm is actually not that strong in the current format. Evenly, on the other hand, is a card that I think we can agree that it is a strong side deck card. Now, Evenly has a couple of downsides, which is why it might not even go into this tier, but rather like at the top of this tier. Evenly is always a card that sounds so good in theory, but then in practice it ends up sometimes not working. A couple of examples where this card sounds very strong but doesn't actually end up working out. Tearlaments almost always in the current format have been siding a copy of Tearlament's Crime to search out when they go first. That is a severe downside for Evenly Matched because you waste your battle phase just to bait out that Tearlament's Crime, which is not very good. Another example is against Fluandereeze. You attempt to go battle phase, they might be inclined to activate the Dreaming Town and put up an Apex Avian before you get to Evenly Matched, which is not great because then they negate your Evenly Matched and all you did was bait the Apex Avian with your battle phase. Another example against Fluandereeze is they don't have Apex or whatever, or you can bait the Apex otherwise, and then you still get to Evenly them. They still keep the Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds or Empen on the field, most likely Barrier Statue, and then your deck has to deal with the Barrier Statue in main phase 2 without being able to attack over it, which is normally the only way that people have to out that card. So against Fluandereeze, Evenly Matched has to always be paired with one or two other specific side deck cards to even beat the board. So it's not actually as good as it seems against Fluandereeze. And against Kashtira, it's kind of the same thing. Yes, it outs the board. Yes, it is good against Kashtira, but you either have to deal with the Arise Heart staying on the board being a macro Cosmos, which is bad for a lot of decks, or they just keep Shangri-Ira and lock all of your zones. It's a weird card. The reason why I'm still going to keep it as a strong inside card is it's because it's a very good pairing as a one-of together with Triple Tactic Task, and it's one of the better cards to have it in multiples, like paired with other cards, right? If you pair an Evenly Matched together with another Boardbreaker card or another side deck card, it's very, very good. It's almost always going to solve all of your problems if it's paired up with another card, which is why I think it's worth considering in combination, because for most matchups you're going to side multiple cards, right? Like for example against Tearlament, if you have another card that can bait the Crime, the Evenly suddenly becomes really strong. Against Kashtira, if you have a way to clear the last remaining monster in main phase 2, Evenly is really good, and if you don't get Ibleed, of course. But yeah, that's Evenly Matched. I think it's a strong card to consider. By no means a side deck staple, but it is a strong option if you have the right cards to pair it up with, in my opinion. Now, there's another category of cards that basically pops up completely fresh in this new format. I mean, I've played Concealing Light in my Sprite deck in Frankfurt, but it's not really been a big deal so far. Cards that flip your opponent's board face down. When this format was a thing in the OCG, Book of Eclipse, Book of Lunar Eclipse to an extent, and Swords of Concealing Light were relatively popular cards in that metagame. The reason for that is that all of these cards have one thing in common, and that is that they are good against Kashtira, Flunder, and Tearlaments, which is very, very nice because coincidentally, Shangri-Ira can't be destroyed by card effects, which makes Raigeki and Dark Hole not so good. And also, these are terrible against Tearlaments because all of their stuff triggers. Booking gets around that. Booking the Tearlament cards not only gets rid of like their effects, but it also gets rid of the Saliak in the back row. The Saliak only works if they have a face-up monster. This also stops the Shangri-Ira from locking your zones. Booking the cards unlocks your zones. Now you might be wondering, okay, I understand now why booking the entire field is solid next format, but which is the best one out of these three? I think the best one, and this is actually an okay main deck card, is Book of Eclipse. The one that's like only okay is Swords of Concealing Light, and that is because this card can be stopped by Arise Heart. Arise Heart has the other effect. It's not only a macrocosmos, it also is a quick effect banish a card on the field, right? And if they set this up with 3 materials, which they might do that to play around cards like Concealing Light, then they can just get rid of it because it's a continuous spell. It will not resolve if it's removed from the field before it fully resolved. That's a downside to this card. Another downside is that Quick Play means you can use it in the draw phase, which is before Shangri-Ira summons out another monster, which is nice. Like, Quick Play definitely matters in this case. There's one downside to Book of Eclipse, which is very hidden. The part of Book of Eclipse where it flips everything face up in the end phase and they draw cards for it means that the card can actually be ashed, which is funny, kind of weird. Like, it's a weird interaction, but don't forget, if you have Ash in Kashtira, you can actually Ash Blossom Book of Eclipse. Anti-spell is also why Quick Plays are better. This is like an issue where like Book of Lunar Eclipse is technically the same card as Book of Eclipse, right? It can't be ashed, right? Because Book of Lunar Eclipse is simply discard a card and then book 2 monsters on the field. Against Kashtira, you're just gonna book the Arise Heart and the Shangri-Ira in the draw phase, and that's really strong. Of course, having to discard is a downside. However, if you're playing a deck like Ishizu tier, you could hypothetically turn that into an upside by discarding like the Mill 5, right? I mean, look, imagine a world where you play against Flunder, they summon Empen Barrier statue, and you just go Book of Lunar Eclipse, discard Kelbeck in your draw phase. That's a good world to live in, I'm telling you that much. So there is a couple of distinct reasons why Book of Lunar Eclipse could be the choice over Book of Eclipse, but that's basically to each individual's decision. You could play either or. Also, if you go first and you have Book of Eclipse in your hand, it is worth noting that it will book your own stuff if you use it defensively. But it can also outplay cards like Impermanent Veiler, if that's ever relevant. But yeah, that's my opinion on these. Thoughts of Concealing Light is an okay card. It's just that I think it's outclassed by these. And this is why I don't know if I would recommend it, but it's not bad. Maybe you have a weird situation where you want even more than just Book of Eclipse or Lunar Eclipse. Next up, we have Kaijus. It's weird to call Kaijus mediocre because the Kaiju concept is still relatively strong. I guess let's talk about all the stuff that tributes your opponent's stuff in one sitting, which is Kaijus, Lava Golem, Kurikara, and Sphere Mode. Kaijus feel kind of mediocre because they only remove one threat, and most decks have multiple threats, right? That's the biggest problem with Kaijus, is like you're kind of looking at them in comparison to like a Book of Eclipse, which removes every threat from the field, whereas a Kaiju only removes one without a real upside for it. Like if you use a card like Mind Control or Change of Heart or Ultimate Slayer to remove a card, at least you get a +1 out of it. Kaiju is like not that. They're definitely at the top end of mediocre. I also chose Gadarla as the example here because that's definitely the best one because of the Flander statue. So if you want to play Kaijus and you're wondering which one is the best one, I would recommend Gadarla just to cover the Flunder matchup best. Overall, there's probably better options though, so that's why I'm gonna put them in mediocre. They're not bad. This is why this category is called mediocre/bad. The ones towards the top of the category are more like mediocre. The ones towards the bottom are more like bad. Lava Golem. Technically, I like Lava Golem a lot, and I would say that every deck that can play Lava Golem probably should. If you can play Lava Golem, you probably want to like even main deck the card, at least strong in the side deck, which is where I'm going to leave it. Of course, the caveat with Lava Golem is that not that many decks can play it, right? The current top decks can't play it because giving up your normal summon is too expensive. Kashtira arguably can, but it makes some of your combos weaker. Like if you used Lava Golem previously, you can't normal summon with Birth. I guess Kashtira could side it. Some rogue decks could side it. Runic decks could side it or even main deck it, even though Runic decks are not in the greatest spot, which we've already discussed. I'm going to throw it at the bottom of this category because it is a strong side deck card in theory. There's just not many decks that can side it. But if your deck can, definitely consider it, I would say. Now, Kurikara. Like, I want to say this. I don't know why freaking people are surprised that this card is going up in price right now. I just want to say that, once again, Josh Twitch viewers rejoice, or even YouTube viewers, because I've told you before that I think this card has potential. I told you that this card was gonna have its format. All it took was for one popular deck to have a weakness to Kurikara, and this is now the time, I think. I have seen people main deck it, but I personally am gonna keep it in the strong in the side deck category. This card is very strong against Kashtira if they don't give you an Ibli or lock all of your zones. If that doesn't happen, then Kurikara is very strong against Kashtira for multiple reasons. The Shangri era is going to trigger in your standby phase to summon out another Kashtira monster. And then the Arise Heart effect, where if a card is banished, you attach a card to it, is mandatory. They have to use this. So if they trigger the Shangri era in the standby phase, and then you have some way of triggering the Arise Heart, that's already 2 monsters that you can just tribute to get a free 4500 Kurikara. Doesn't start a chain, can't be negated even if they play like Adventure Engine, and you just have a 4500 beater attack over whatever is left, and it's like, it's really good. The only downside, oh wait, there's 2 downsides. The first downside is it's pretty much only really strong against Kashtira. It's like against the tier limit matchup, you probably find a spot for it. You can even side it. If you have it in your side deck, you can even like use it against stuff like Sprite. You can like attempt to enter battle phase. They activate Elf. You go Kurikara tribute Elf, attack over Toad. It's a good card against Sprite, but Sprite is not the biggest deal. So like it's good against basically Kashtira and some other not top tier stuff, which is a little bit of a downside, right? If I have a side deck card, I really want it to be good against as many decks as possible. Kurikara doesn't really do that. In the Kashtira matchup, it is pretty strong. However, only if they don't give you Ibli, which I've noticed I'm mentioning Ibli a lot. That card seems to be a big deal. It remains to be seen how many people actually play Ibli. If Ibli is a thing, you might fare better with cards like Book of Eclipse, Dark Hole, and even some other options. If Ibli is not that common, I think you are just better off playing cards like Kurikara or Nibiru against Kashtira specifically. However, it's worth noting that cards like Book of Eclipse and Dark Hole also cover Flunder, which Kurikara doesn't. Sphere mode is exactly the same as Lava Golem. Well, not exactly the same, but the concept is the same. If your deck can play Sphere mode, it probably should. Basically, if your deck can play Lava Golem, it can also play Sphere mode. Whether you should play both, I don't know, but you should probably be playing one of them if you can. The question is which one's better. Now, against most decks, of course, Tributing 3 is better. Lava Golem is worse against Flunder because of the Wind statue. But of course, the normal Flunder board only has 2 monsters, so Sphere mode also doesn't work. The question is basically, do you think that when your opponent opens Statue Trap, if you announce battle phase, do you think they always go for Apex? If you think the answer is yes, Sphere mode is an exceptionally good card against Flunder, because it baits out the trap card and then you tribute all they have. So if your deck can play under Sphere mode and you think it's always going to work like that against Flunder, then hey, go for it. Play Sphere mode. That's awesome. That's very good. That's much better than Lava Golem. Against Kashtira, they're both equally good, I would say. Like, I mean, technically Sphere mode is stronger because they usually end on at least 3 monsters, so you can just Sphere mode them instead of Lava Golem them. So I would overall say probably Sphere mode is a better card, whereas Lava Golem is like a little bit less risky because it's not going to be dead as often. It's harder to play around Lava Golem than Sphere mode, essentially. And that's enough for the cards that tribute your opponent's shit. This is that category. Now let's move on to the category of monsters that destroy your opponent's shit. The face of that category is Pankratops. Now, unfortunately, the boy Pankratops is kind of mediocre right now, simply because most decks are not really vulnerable to it. The only matchup where I see Pankratops being somewhat okay is Kashtira, where you can just special Pank, pop the Arise Heart. But it's not very good against tier because whatever you're gonna pop against tier is just gonna trigger and you can't special it against barrier statues, so that's not great. Pankratops' new little bit more broken brother Fenrir, on the other hand, is absolutely a good card. I might even go as far as putting it in the strong in the main deck category. Now, Fenrir does not really walk away with any game on its own. Like, it doesn't really win any game on its own, but it's a really good card if paired with any other like board breaker card, right? It's really nice to pair Fenrir with anything that's like remotely good. Its biggest advantage over Pankratops is that you can main deck it, and I stand by what I said previously. The only reason why people don't really play Fenrir right now is because everyone is on Bystials, and that has some anti-synergy with Fenrir when you go second, because if you already have a Bystial on the board, you can't special summon Fenrir. Also, it's very expensive. That might be a reason for a couple of people. That is true. However, I think if people move away from Bestials, which is looking like it's the trend with the new set, which I've elaborated more on in the hand trap tier list video, which is, you might want to watch that if you missed it. If people go down on Bestials, this card is very strong, I think. I see little reason in a deck that doesn't have Bestials to not play Fenrir, because card is strong going first, card is strong going second, card helps you break boards, card doesn't even lose hand advantage, right? Card, it just replaces itself. Card is very strong. Alpha is one of those cards where I really like Alpha as a card. I just have never been really able to use it, so it seems like slightly not strong enough. But hey, I love my boy Alpha. I'm just gonna put him in experimental. If you want to experiment with Alpha, go ahead. I'm not stopping you. I'm not stopping you. I love Alpha. I think it's a very cool card. It's a very well-designed card, which maybe makes it a little bit too fair, but it is cool. There's a couple decks where it's okay. It's just like the problem with it is that it's probably gonna be worse than most of these other cards. Like for almost any given deck, you're probably gonna find a better option than Alpha. But if you have a specific reason to experiment with it, then go for it. Like I said, I'm not stopping you. Please go ahead and make Alpha good. I beg you. I like this card a lot. Super Poly is, of course, it's a broken card. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what you're gonna Super Poly against Kashtira. If they end on Diablosis and a Rise Heart, you can Super Poly that. The problem is you're gonna have a bunch of zones locked already. I don't know. I'm not so sure about Super Poly, because also against Kashtira, your discard is going to be banished, because at the time that you pay the cost of the card, it's gonna be banished. So you can't even discard like a cool graveyard effect or a Kelbeck or an Agido, which are specifically not included in the cool graveyard effect category. But yeah, it's a strong card still. It's probably an okay card. But once again, I would rather probably book my opponent's monster than fuse them away, right? Doesn't really work against Flu unless you can run over the statue. Against Tier, yes, it works if they make Dweller plus Rule Kalos in the Tier mirror. Maybe it's a fine answer to Dweller. But even then, their stuff comes back from the graveyard if you fuse with it. So overall, it's an okay card. It's definitely playable. Out of the ones on this list, not my favorite though in this upcoming format, which doesn't mean that it's not broken. Hey, I just want to say that really quick. Just happens to not be as good this format, I think. But maybe it even is. Maybe I'm underestimating it. Maybe it's playable. Or maybe it's strong even. Enemy Controller is only in here because I am biased. I love this card. Do you have a moment to speak about our Lord and Savior Enemy Controller, chat? The card is probably not very good in this upcoming format. It felt like kind of a specifically good card in Sprite. The one reason why this morning when I assembled this tier list, I decided to still include it was because of how often we've already mentioned Ibli, right? We've already mentioned Ibli a couple of times, and Enemy Controller is technically a really based answer to Ibli, because you can just like tribute the Ibli and take their shit, which is really cool. By the way, that's the category we've arrived at. This is the category of we're gonna take their shit. Look, I'm biased and you can't do anything to stop me, so I'm gonna put it in experimental. Once again, if you want to experiment with this card, it has some cool interactions like dodging Saliak, tributing Ibli. If you want to experiment with it, hey, I'm not stopping you. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. But be aware that probably other cards are better. And now, no, wait, before we go into the actual stuff, let me do Ultimate Slayer, because that was supposed to be in the category of we're destroying and getting rid of your shit. This card is bad. This card is bad next format, unfortunately. I guess, no, it's not. It's just not main deckable. It's at the very bottom of side deck. Now, and I'll tell you why. It's a similar reason as to why Droplet is not very good against Kashtira. It's because that Ultimate Slayer is a cost, right? Which normally is the best part of the card, right? It's the best part about the card is that it sends for a cost. So even if they have a way to negate it or dodge it, you still get the effect of the card that you send. And on top of that, Ultimate Slayer also gets support in Photon Hypernova, which is the Tri-Brigade Link 5 monster, which gives this card finally a good link target without playing the freaking Evil Twin brick. Now, this card is not main deckable at all. It sucks against Thunder and it sucks against Kashtira. However, I'm not going to actually put it in the mediocre or bad category, because if you want to side it against tier elements, you technically can. It's not terrible against tier elements, because sending Garura to spin a fusion or sending the Tri-Brigade guy to spin Elf or whatever is not bad. I don't think it's bad. It outs Baguska, it outs Rule Kalos, it outs Elf, it outs a lot of stuff that I think is okay. And now we continue with the cards that take your opponent's shit. Before we get into like probably the high point of this freaking video, let's talk about Change of Heart and Mind Control real quick. I've been main decking these cards a lot in the last couple of formats. I really like them. I think they're okay. But That was specifically kind of like a Sprite deal to play these cards, because especially after Sprint was released, this card's got a lot better because you can just yoink a monster, disable Sulliak if it's their only tier, and then make Sprint with it. That was kind of pog. But Sprite loses a lot of viability. In Sprite, these cards are still okay to main deck, I think. They are decent against Kashtira as well. I'm gonna say Change of Heart is a lot better than Mind Control, because specifically against Kashtira... No, actually, they're both good against Kashtira. One specific interaction makes these cards okay against Kashtira, or good against Kashtira, which is Kashtira Arise Hard reads... If Kashtira Shangri-Ira activated its effect this turn, you can also XYZ summon it by using a Kashtira monster you control. And this doesn't refer that you have to have activated Kashtira Shangri-Ira. This also includes your opponent. So, if your opponent uses Shangri-Ira in the standby phase, you can simply Mind Control or Change of Heart one of their Kashtira monsters and make your own Arise Heart on top of it. Of course, you have to play an Arise Heart in your extra deck, but you can like get rid of their monster and you get your own Kashtira Arise Heart, which is cool. They're obviously good against tier elements. If they only make one tier monster, you just take it, and that disables Sulliak as well. So in certain decks, you might want to consider main decking these. They're okay. They're okay. Change of Heart is good against Flunder. Mind Control is bad against Flunder, unless you play a Link Wind 2 to link off the barrier statue. But and now we get into this is peak board breaking for next format. Hey, we go here. Okay. We go here real quick. Triple Tactic Tasking, which, hold up real quick. Let me pull this card up, actually. Because, I mean, since the set isn't out yet, some of you might want an introduction to this card, and I haven't made a dedicated video about it, which maybe I should have. But let's talk about Triple Tactic Tasking before we end the video, because this is certainly the highlight of the board breaking stuff that we can play next format. If your opponent has activated a monster effect this turn, set a normal spell trap directly from your deck except Triple Tactic Tasking. It cannot be activated this turn. Or if your opponent controls a monster, you can add that card to your hand instead, in which case it can be activated this turn. There's a lot of confusion about this. If you get to add the card from deck to hand because your opponent has a monster, you can immediately use it. You can only not use it if you set it. You can only activate one Triple Tactic Tasking per turn. Now, this card might seem like Triple Tactic Talents with just a different skin. There's a couple of differences. First of all, this card's activation requirement is a lot easier than Triple Tactic Talents because this card doesn't specify main phase. This card can be used if your opponent has used a monster effect at any point. At any point, if you go to the battle phase against Sprite and you attack over their Toad and they use Toad to add back to hand, you can Tactics Tasking in main phase too. If they play around something in the draw phase or standby phase because they want to play around like Talents, you still use Tasking. If they use Shangri-Ira in the standby phase to summon a Kashtira from the deck, you can immediately use Tasking. So what is the use of this card? Because this card can search any normal spell trap in the game. So what are we doing with it? The obvious choices for going second when you try to break a board is Evenly or Dark Ruler No More, which are fine. Those are good cards. Those are technically not cards you really want to main deck generally. Sometimes you do, but most of the time you don't. You can grab powerful board breaker cards, like you can just grab Talents, right? Because most likely if Tasking is live, Talents is also live. You can search Harpy's Feather Duster, which I didn't include because it only clears back row, but that's also sometimes a good card against back row decks. You can grab Evenly Match, you can grab Lightning Storm, you can grab whatever, but the most broken stuff about this entire thing is it adds instant fusion to the tier element player's hand. That is by far the most broken interaction of this card, which is why this card is strong in the main deck. This card single-handedly will force people to think about what they are going to play against tier element now, because Bestials literally do nothing if your opponent has Tasking. Think about it. You use a Bestial to stop a tier effect in the grave. They go Tasking, add instant fusion. They still get the Kid Kalos and you can't do anything about it. That's very good. That's very, very good. Triple Tactics Talents is also still a very good card, but because Triple Tactics Tasking is seeing so much play, most of the time you're only going to see one Talents. That's usually what I see, is people play a couple copies of Triple Tactic Tasking and they only play one Talents, because if you play 3 and 3, that becomes kind of bricky. Triple Tactic Tasking, in my opinion, I don't know if it's going to be a main deck staple in every single deck, and I don't know exactly which types of cards it's always going to be paired with. I assume it's going to be paired with like Dark Ruler, Raigeki, maybe like Evenly Matched as a one-off, Tactics as a one-off, maybe Change of Heart. Those types of cards in a lot of side decks and even in a bunch of tier element main decks. It's not a main deck staple, but it is a strong option, and it's going to warp the meta. Like the way you look at Bestials completely changes because of this card, and it in itself is a reason why board breakers in general become stronger, right? Because if my opponent goes first and they have have the potential of having triple tactics tasking in their deck. I might want to settle on a strategy that tries to break their board rather than trying to stop them with hand traps, because, you know, if I try to stop them with spells, like on my turn, break their board, that doesn't run into the tactics effect, right? So just some food for thought. Maybe you want to reconsider whether your deck should be on like 12 hand traps or rather like 12 board breakers or whatnot. Something to consider, definitely. And there's that. This is the board breaker tier list. As usual, if you have a card that you think should have been in this video or you want my opinion on, leave a comment down below. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you check out the other tier list that I did. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and without further ado, say goodbye to YouTube chat. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed the video, all the good stuff, you know what it is. And bye bye. Peace. God damn it, my food's already cold.